Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a special guest today, entrepreneur, hedge fund manager, coin developer now as well. James Koutoulas, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you very much. So tell me about this. Tell me about this coin, the Let's Go branded coin. I think it's really funny.
Sure. So I wasn't the developer, but my Halloween costume actually inspired it. So I had dressed up as the president of China with like a big head mask, like a Biden blow-up doll, and a sign that said "Let's go, Brandon." And then some girl I had never even met on Instagram is like, "That should be a coin." I'm like, "LGB coin, amazing!" I joked about it to a couple crypto guys. One of them made it. It went completely viral. Like, so it went from about 0 to 400 million in about 10 days. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is like lightning in a bottle. We have to like do something legitimate with this. So we began trying to help conservative focused charities like Turning Point, the Goodman Institute, Aquanauts Adaptive Aquatics, which helps veterans with disabilities get scuba dive therapy, things like that. And then, one of the issues that came up like right away was, since Brandon Brown, the person was there at the time, that the phrase was coined that, we need to go get his name, image, and likeness rights, and work together with them, or else they could potentially like cease and desist the coin. So we wound up doing a sponsorship deal with Brandon, who couldn't get any other sponsors since he was essentially canceled by the left, even though he had nothing to do with the phrase being created. It was all Kelly Stavis at NBC who lied about what the crowd was saying. They were all saying, as we all know, like F Joe Biden. And she's like, oh, no, they're all saying, let's go, Brandon. Isn't that great? Mm-hmm. So, Ron DeSantis often comments, it's that outright gaslighting and, protests against the media lying to us. And this was right in the middle of COVID and mask mandates and jab mandates and, all that other, unconstitutional stuff being done by the government, deplatforming off of, social media. So we really leaned into that, and worked on and still are working to advocate against all of these issues. I mean, we're seeing now, the Biden administration is trying to tee up another COVID variant scare, right about 1 year ahead of the election, possibly to justify an attempt to getting mail-in ballots again, right? Like it just never ends with this administration. Anyway, we did a sponsorship with Brandon Brown. His team submitted to NASCAR. NASCAR approved the sponsorship in writing. The coin put out a press release. It wound up going up to like 570 million in aggregate value. The day that went out, and like 5 days later, NASCAR revoked the sponsorship, went out to the media, said the coin was worthless, claimed they never approved it, defamed us, and dropped like 400 million bucks in a day. So now it's really spawned a lot of litigation. Like, I'm leading a $1.4 billion lawsuit against NASCAR. This other guy who claimed like I was a national hero bringing the conservative movement into the 21st century sued me over like $9,000. That's run up a couple $1 million worth of legal fees. We did like me sued like Candace Owens, like David Harris Jr., like just ridiculous sham lawsuit. And then the SEC tried to piggyback on me on that and try to subpoena me, Candace, Madison Cawthorn. Even though the coin is obviously not a security. So I've since sued the SEC and I'm hoping to, win and bar them from harassing projects that clearly are not securities. As most people know, they're out there harassing like Coinbase, like, claiming coins that Gensler raved about back in 2019 are now suddenly, securities. So, the SEC is really one of the big proponents of the administration weaponizing the federal government against political opponents.
Yeah, I mean, this is, for a lot of people that get involved in crypto, this is the reason they got involved, is to try to decentralize the ability to manage their own finances however the fuck they want without the government getting involved in it. For some reason, these greedy little pigs think that they're entitled to 20 to 40% of your shit, whether they perform any services or not, right? And they do so, under threat of violence, essentially, because I don't know if you heard, but last week, the IRS was conducting training raids, and one IRS agent shot another one. So that makes me feel really safe.
Jesus.
One
I didn't even see that, but they hired 87,000 armed IRS agents. It's like a secret police force.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird that that every federal agency is starting to arm itself against the population. It feels very much like the sheriff of Nottingham. You know what I mean? Like this just feudalistic bullshit that's been going on over the last several decades in the United States, trying to kind of bring it back. What we see are career politicians whose net worth goes from $50,000 to several hundred million. Over the course of 40 years.
Pelosi, the Clintons, the Bidens, the Obamas. Yeah.
Yep. So it's like, that's just feudalism with a different name. And we fought a war to stop that shit. And it's very bizarre to me that people, I guess we're just dumb human beings because we have all the access to this information. We know exactly what this is. It's like if you went into a movie and you watched the movie and it was a direct rip-off of a movie you'd already seen, you'd pick up on that pretty quick. You'd be like, oh, this is that same movie. They just changed some of the characters around. And that's what we're dealing with right now in 2023. It's just the same bullshit from the Middle Ages to Victorian England, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, look, the chief Bond villain, like cartel of globalism, the World Economic Forum, has plainly said that they want to bring about neo-feudalism, right? They want you to own nothing, be happy, cut your carbon footprint 90%, lower the population, all in the name of their new religion of climate change that they're using as a control mechanism in the absence of actual religion, right? And at the same time, you're eating bugs, they're flying on their private jets, controlling you. I mean, and they say this. This is all public. I mean, the WEF interviewed the president of Pfizer, where they were bragging about how they've developed pills with embedded Wi-Fi chips so that they could track vaccine compliance. I mean, this is all said in the public. It's not a conspiracy theory. This isn't you're assuming something that's said is in the back room. But these are the guys who are grooming this whole generation of leaders in this communistic spirit, like Justin Trudeau in Canada was in the WEF Young Leaders Program. And, guess what? He's trying to take away guns in Canada. They debanked people who donated to the Freedom Convoy, which was the trucker protest of COVID lockdowns in Canada. And they seized those donations and gave them to Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's things like this, while at the same time, we're printing trillions of dollars in fiat currency. The rest of the world is trying to supplant the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Okay, crypto is the only thing that is a hedge against that, and is a hedge against us going into an authoritarian dominion, right? Like you see it in China, they have social credit, where if you criticize the government, you do an action that's deemed against the party, right? That they take all your money, they put your picture on billboards, like someone associates with you, they take their money, right? Well, guess what? In the US last year, PayPal, who I believe is the largest payment processor in the US, they changed their terms of use to say if you post anything that they consider misinformation, they will reach through your PayPal account into your bank account and take $2,500 out of your bank account per offense. Okay, that is dystopian. I mean, that is an Orwellian control mechanism. And you see big tech, like PayPal, like Twitter, definitively collaborating with the government to censor political opponents. Like there's a federal case going on right now, the state of Missouri versus Joe Biden, where a trial court has found, right, this isn't a conspiracy theory, this isn't conjecture, this is a trial court holding that the administration illegally conspired with social media networks to deplatform people like President Trump, like Dr. Robert Malone, a co-inventor of the mRNA vaccines, and to violate their First Amendment rights. They found that the Surgeon General, the Department of Justice, the FBI, all unconstitutionally conspired to take away citizens' First Amendment rights. And that case is now on appeal. So the government was found guilty of this, and they are appealing it. And they actually have the injunction stayed currently so that they could continue to illegally work with social media to censor their political opponents. Do you see a theme here?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's I saw to the China part. I saw a woman on Twitter the other day, and she's a Western citizen, born and raised in the West, but is in China working and has family there. So she's of Chinese descent, but she was born and raised in the West. But she's back there working, has family around. Apparently, she said some things on social media that the state didn't like, or whomever it is that monitors that. And as a result, she can't take money out of the bank now to buy food, right? So,
Yeah.
like that's pretty much. You have to take these things to the extreme example, because that's where it's fucking headed. It's like that. I'm not sure if you're a Game of Thrones fan, but Littlefinger's character in that.
Until season 7.
Well, yeah, of course, everybody kind of fell off there, but Littlefinger's character said something to the effect of, "I like to play a game. I assume that my opponent is thinking the worst, most evil possible shit to do to me, and then I assume that's true, right?" And that's how you should feel about the government. That's how we set this country up, right? Of the first 10 rights enumerated by the United States founders, 2 of them, the 9th and 10th Amendment, were specifically designed to make sure that the federal government did not amass any sort of power whatsoever, right? That was the entire point of it. And the first one was that we should be able to talk shit if we feel like it. And the second one is, if that doesn't work out, we should be able to fucking fight them with violence, right? So, if you're an American and you're patriotic, you really do have to refocus yourself on this antagonistic viewpoint. I know that modern conservatism and libertarianism has taken on this, I guess you might call it a mantle or motif of live and let live, right? Like, I don't want to be fucked with, so don't fuck with me, which is fine. I mean, that's a decent ethos to have, but it doesn't work when there's foxes in the hen house. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be eternally vigilant against this bullshit.
And and that's what I've done, right? I mean, like the Let's Go coin was minted on the right around the 10-year anniversary of the MF Global bankruptcy, where I went and I pro bono represented 38,000 customers against President Obama's biggest donor, John Corzine, who stole 1.6 billion from their segregated brokerage account. So he stole from farmers, ranchers, retirees, companies like Koch Industries, Coca-Cola, Southwest Airlines, Charles Schwab. I fought him, JP Morgan Chase, Clinton's FBI director, Obama's attorney general, and I did the government's job for it when Gary Gensler, the current SEC chairman, was then chairman of the CFTC, and it was his mentor, John Corzine, who stole all this money, right? The government didn't go get it back. I did, and I did it for free because it was the right thing to do. Did another bankruptcy for free, helped get $300 million back. I'm a federal whistleblower, okay, but who does the SEC want to mess with? SBF, who stole $9 billion from his customers at FTX? No, because his parents are buddies of Gary Gensler. They want to mess with Let's Go Brandon Coin because we're advocating against the federal government. We're advocating against weaponization. We're advocating against censorship. So guess what? I've had 6 bank accounts closed for no reason given this year. Had a credit card closed. I've had inquiries from the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, even though I'm a federally protected whistleblower, supposedly. I had a 5-month audit from the National Futures Association, which is the regulator whose executive committee that I was on, who I whistleblew against the president of that organization, who falsified board meeting minutes when they didn't properly reelect their compensation committee. Imagine that. I'm just waiting for the IRS to show up with their armed agents next, right? I mean, they've subpoenaed my friends, okay, and I'm not going to take it. I sued the SEC, okay, and I'm going to win too, and I'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And you mentioned the constitutional protections. Well, back when the Constitution was drafted, the executive branch was a president. That's it. Now we have all these administrative agencies. You have hundreds of thousands of government bureaucrats who are out there just trying to get more and more power every single day and exert it over citizens so that they can keep getting paid. Like the IRS didn't exist. We didn't have an income tax till 1913. And back then it was 3%. Now, as you said, it's between the federal, state, local governments, many Americans are paying over 50% of their income to taxes, to be controlled, to be harassed and support the corruption of these elected officials amassing multi-$100 million net worths while they've never had a job outside of politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, and it's not just a federal problem, by the way. There's about 3 million federal employees, not to include the military.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 20 million state and local government employees as well. 20 fucking
Oh,
million
yeah.
people. 20 million people. We're talking about a workforce of about, what, 220 million in this country, I think, of people that aren't of retired age or aren't children, 18 or 17 or
Mm-hmm.
younger. I think it's about 220 million.
Yeah,
So,
that's 2/3 of the population. So
right,
that's
right, yeah.
dead on, I
Yeah.
think.
So 23 million of them are government employees. 23 million out of the 220 million people, right, are government employees. That seems like it shouldn't be possible that a tenth of our entire workforce works for the fucking government, right? In a country
Mm-hmm.
that was specifically established to limit the government's power. We have 1/10 of our working population, working for a government in some form or another. That should be impossible, I think. But this is what happens, right? It's, to me, and it's kind of the crux of this show. I talk about it all the time. You can either bitch and moan about your rights and, red, blue, black, white pill, whatever the fuck you want to call it. And somebody else will secure those rights for you, and you will be a subject under their rule. Or you can perform the responsibilities required of you to secure those rights yourself, and that's what makes you a citizen of this country. And we have fallen
Mm-hmm.
asleep at the wheel and wrapped our car around a fucking telephone pole. You know what I mean? I mean, we are on ice skates going downhill right now.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's why I'm spending every waking hour in court trying to fight this shit, right? And thank God President Trump appointed a competent Supreme Court because the area where I'm best suited to fighting back is against the overreach of the administrative state. So all these agencies under the president that all have their own fake court systems, right, that aren't appointed in terms with the Constitution. Well, guess what? This Supreme Court has found, that has voted against the SEC 5 out of 6 times. Okay, they went against the FTC. They've gone against the EPA. They're continuously trying to limit the power of this administrative overreach, which are these completely unaccountable bureaucrats who aren't approved by Congress. They're not really accountable to anybody, like scum like Gary Gensler.
Yeah, how do I've seen plenty of court cases on this, and the most recent, I think, that made it to the Supreme Court, there's I believe was the CDC, or I'm sorry, OSHA trying to force vaccinate people. I think is the last one that actually got decided at the Supreme Court. There's another one for guns. The pistol brace thing is going to go to the Supreme Court because essentially the ATF just passed down an internal memo and made 40 million people felons, right? I mean, it's a federal agency
No big
doesn't.
deal.
They're subvert what the Supreme Court ruled as far as OSHA goes was that the executive branch via one of their agencies or divisions subverted the legislative process by just making a rule that criminalized certain activity. That's illegal, right? You can't do that in the United States. You can't fucking change a policy and turn a non-crime into a fucking crime without a vote in Congress. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, I wonder from your perspective, you're dealing with not just not just any of these agencies we think of, but the regulatory bodies as well, FTC, SEC, IRS, so on, right? And they do this shit all the time. The IRS does shit like this all the time. The SEC just makes up rules. As a matter of fact, the people that the SEC and FTC investigate on a regular basis pretty much pay their salaries, right? So, and it's the same kind of situation with the FDA. And it is just completely corrupt. Like there's no, you can't trace a line from point A to point C without somebody getting paid in the middle. You know what I mean? For any of these
Oh, yeah.
regulatory bodies. So, what exactly is the strategy to fight back against them, except for just a court case here and a court case there? Is there a larger strategy to deal with this bullshit?
Well, it's the court cases when you win at the appellate and the Supreme Court level is when you're literally changing the law,
Mm.
right? So if you have this ambiguous nature of the law and you take it to court and you win, we're in a common law legal system. So like the courts actually do make binding precedent on these agencies. So a huge case that was decided in April was FTC versus Axon, which was also consolidated with a case against the SEC, and that was about the constitutionality of administrative law proceedings. So basically, there was a woman who the SEC alleged had done something wrong, and they made her comply with discovery and give up all her bank accounts and credit cards and brokerage statements. Go through like 9 years of these administrative law judge-run courts where you have judges that aren't appointed per the procedures in the Constitution, made her lose and then have to go challenge the constitutionality in federal court, which that took another couple years, right? Well, she won at the Supreme Court, and now I just sued the SEC under her precedent in April saying I could challenge the constitutionality of their subpoena in federal court now without having to give them access to, they asked for 10,000 documents from me and want to go through all my banks, my credit card statements. Like, give me a break over a meme coin that's obviously not a security. And, most people, they roll over and they comply. They don't want to go to court. They don't want to pay lawyers. They don't want the time, the stress, the aggravation. Just like in COVID, you saw people wear their masks because they don't want to, make waves. But, the way we fight back is making waves and going to court, beating them, and making sure we have election integrity so that we could vote the people who appoint them out of office.
Yeah, that's another part of this for sure. Is not just winning the case, but then holding the people accountable. I mean, it's there. There is no functional way, for the most part, that I've seen to hold regulatory bureaucrats accountable for anything. It is notoriously difficult to fire a federal employee unless there's some kind of egregious crime that they've committed. And unfortunately, that doesn't include violating people's civil rights. That just kind of gets swept under the rug. So I do wonder, you see these people from the pharmaceutical industry, especially FDA and pharmaceutical industry and SEC specifically, those three organizations, they pretty much just interchange employees with the companies that they regulate on a regular basis. And I'm not talking about somebody that was an accountant at fucking, right, at the SEC who's now an accountant for, some company. No, it's like the head of Pfizer.
Like Gary Gensler, who was at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
He ran the CFTC, then the SEC. Yep. And in the middle was the CFO for Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Mm-hmm.
He's the poster child.
Or the, people that just worked at the CDC are now, or FDA are now the president of, I think Moderna's new president is a former federal employee. And if you look in the boards of any of these companies, right, whether it's finance or pharmaceutical or food or any of this stuff, it's just a revolving door of, and then now we've added social media to that as well. Right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, social media is even worse.
Like
it's
Twitter.
Straight out of 1984, except they're ostensibly private company.
Yeah, well, Twitter before Elon was publicly traded, right? And they still had 120 former federal agents working there or some shit. How is that possible, man? And if, look, you're free to do whatever you want. I left federal service and went and worked for another company. But Jesus Christ, it's like, I didn't go from doing immigration intelligence to working for an immigration lawyer. You know what I mean? Because that would be a conflict, in my opinion. I think there should be some kind of moratorium on that. And I wonder if that isn't something, I know that you've got your hands full with all this stuff now, but on the back end of some of this stuff, there does need to be some common law that has teeth to it. It isn't just, well, we won and you can't do that again. It's we won, you can't do that again, and you're all fucking fired. Right? Because quite frankly,
it's hard to do. I would get rid of several of these agencies. Why do we need a Department of Education? We need an entire government agency to say, okay, we're going to start teaching critical race theory and that there's 93 genders in public schools. Like, why does that entire agency even exist?
I don't know. I mean, they're not doing a very good job either. You know,
Well,
um,
I think they're doing a good job at getting like the Chinese Communist Party's agenda, where instead of teaching students about like science and math, that they're teaching them that there's 93 genders and that they should hate white people. I mean, like that's what's being taught in public schools now.
that is, yeah, that's very useful, I guess, if you're trying to destroy the country. So
Hmm.
technically, they're doing a good job at that, yeah. But they're not doing a good job at anything that they're supposed to be doing. But back to my point from before, we do we do have this live and let live thing. People will say like, "Well, I'll just take my kids out of school and homeschool them or put them in private school." And like, all right, cool, you helped your kid, but that's not what we do
Yep.
here in this country. We fucking build community for a reason here, right? And
Hmm.
the only way to stop the federal government from doing bullshit like this is to find problems in your local community and solve them before the federal government shows up. Because if they show up and there's not a handout, then they have no power. That's how the federal government works, right? If they can't force you into complying with their bullshit by offering you something that you desperately need, then they have no power, and they know that, right? And that's why crypto scares them so much.
Oh yeah. No, my buddy Madison Cawthorn says it best: says that the government's got a monopoly on two things: violence and money. And crypto threatens that monopoly. And what they're actively trying to do now is implement what's called a central bank digital currency, which is kind of like what we talked about with PayPal. Well, PayPal's a private company, but if you got rid of cash and you said all transactions need to be done on this digital dollar, then you criticize Biden, then they shut off your money. You buy a gun, they're going to charge 100% tax on that, right? They're going to flag you in a database. They could track every single transaction. So, currently you have this dichotomy in this country where there's like $5 trillion of the Pentagon budget that can't be accounted for, but they want you to report every $600 Venmo transaction. Okay. This government wants complete and total surveillance over everything that every person does. Okay. Because if you do something like have your Halloween costume start a coin that makes fun of the president, they want to destroy your life.
Yeah, the Pentagon hasn't passed a budget review
Ever. I don't think
since
they've ever passed an audit.
ever. Well, they started doing them in 2000, I think, and they haven't passed one since then. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard. That's like taking diet advice from a fat dummy. You know what I mean? Like, why the fuck would I listen to the government who is $32 trillion in debt? You know what I mean? Speak to me about finance. But we've made that mistake time and time again, not just with money. Um, I realized that the internet didn't exist back in the 50s, but common sense certainly did. And when they brought a product, high fructose corn syrup, that was being like exclusively used to fatten up pigs for slaughter. That's the only use it had at the time. And then introduced that into the human diet. And nobody was like, hey, maybe not, let's not do that, right?
Not
Or,
good.
like we had science back then. I'm sure of it. I know of scientists who existed back then. Did nobody raise their hand and be like, hey, we've been eating like meat and berries for the last 2 million years. Maybe we'll just keep doing that, and you guys keep the
Hmm.
pig slop for the pigs. But we make this mistake over and over again, over and over again. The housing market, fucking 3 times in the last 40 years, they have completely butt fucked the
It's
housing
about to
market.
seize up again, by
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like we're on this regular schedule. I like to think, or I like to use the metaphor that we are in an extremely abusive relationship with our government, right? I mean, we are a battered woman, and that is the sad truth.
Yeah, and look at like Ben Franklin said it best, over 200 years ago. It's that he who trades liberty for security will wind up with neither,
Mm.
right? And like the fear porn. I mean, really, 9/11 was the big turning point of that. Like, I mean, it's kind of an unpopular thing to say, but 9/11 is what ushered in peace accords, the Patriot Act, where the government's reviewing, every single major financial transaction. We gave the government permission to spy on every citizen out of fear of 9/11,
Mm.
right? And things have gotten markedly worse since, right? I mean, like you watch, like Seinfeld episodes and stuff from the 90s. I mean, that was really like peak Americana, like, since 9/11, since Patriot Act. Um, the speed at which freedoms have been eroded, government has grown, government debt has grown. I mean, it's just breathtaking. And look, it's all crescendoing to what the World Economic Forum wants, which is the Great Reset by 2030, right? Like we've got to a point now with all of the money printing that was done during COVID, post COVID, the pathologically, ironically named Inflation Reduction Act by Biden, right? That has enabled the Fed to raise interest rates at record pace now when we also have record debt. So we're about to hit $1 trillion a year, just an annual interest payment on the debt. Okay, like the debt wasn't even $1 trillion during Ronald Reagan, right? So we're going to pay more than all of that every year in interest payments. U.S. credit card debt is $1 trillion. Countries worldwide are trying to get rid of the dollar and implement this new brick currency, right? I mean, like they are setting it up to destroy the entire financial system. And then, we've got this precedent now for stimulus during COVID when everybody got these $1,200 checks. Now they want to give $700 checks to Maui, all while sending tens of hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine to fight a proxy war and launder money that way as well. Right. Well, the next time stimulus comes, it's going to be on this central bank digital currency, which is this digital currency controlled by the government. Be like, oh, sorry, the stock market crashed. Oh, sorry, we have 35, trillion in government debt. But here's $100,000 in your central bank digital currency, and that's how they're going to drive, the adoption of that. And, that's the means where they ultimately will have total control over people. Because if you could debank them, okay, how do they fight back?
Yeah. It's in the modern world, it can be difficult to know what's going on sometimes because there's, a lot of bad information. There's a flood of it as well. There's just so much data now that can be difficult to understand or get a bigger picture, I guess, of what's going on. But, it always helps to think about the classic strategies, right? I mean, it's why people still play chess. Chess was invented as a war game. Go was invented as a war game, right? Like military strategy, basically. And so how do you know you're at war with somebody? Are they trying to attack your food supply or any supply line whatsoever, no matter what it happens to be? But let's stick with food here. Are they trying to manipulate your currency as China has been doing to us for the last fucking 20 years? Obviously, that's been going on. Are they trying to manipulate your housing? Just think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if somebody is fucking around with those things for you and your family, your community, your state, your country, then you are at war with those people, regardless if any gunshots are going off or not, right? This is what we call battlefield preparation. And it used to be pretty obvious that it was the Russians or Chinese that were trying to pull some bullshit like that. But now it's members of our own government who are working in concert with these globalist movements like the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and people like this to do. And people ask me this all the time. Like, why? Why would they do all this? Why would they do all this? It doesn't make any sense. Like, they live in this world too. Why would they fucking ruin it? Like, well, they're all going to be in Davos while you're starving to death. You know what I mean? It's the only way to take over the system is to crush it first. And that is exactly what's happening. I mean, it's hard to make an argument. I try not to be too conspiratorial, but it's hard to look around at what's going on and not see a coordinated effort by global players to fucking destroy particularly the American economy.
Well, not just the economy, but the military. Look at the Afghan withdrawal. It was so beyond incompetent that it could only have been malicious and intentional. Okay. The gender education, the destruction of every blue city in America by legalizing shoplifting, defunding the police, Good Samaritans in New York save lives and they're the ones on trial. Okay. You could commit a violent crime in Chicago and be out without bail the next day. Right? Like this is all intentional destruction of America. And, you really have Florida and Texas as the two remaining major state Alamos, right? Like we're like the two last big free states. I mean, I think Tennessee, Wyoming, Montana, you have some smaller states. like that. But, our once great cities, I mean, like New York is uninhabitable. Like San Francisco is a literal human toilet, and it's all by design. It's treasonous,
Mm.
right? And, you touched on it. It's they, these elites, they all want to be on Davos. They don't care about the country. They care about their own personal power. And that's why you also see this correlated rise in pedophilia and human trafficking. Okay, because if you're a sick sociopath who gets off on power, there's no better feeling than destroying an innocent child's life, right? Like these are all correlated, like the destruction of America, the proliferation of crime, spying on people, making hundreds of millions of dollars from public service, right? Like they love this. Like, AOC wearing the tax the rich dress to the Met Gala, which is, tens of thousands of dollars a ticket. They're not accidental hypocrites. They get off on flouting the rules and being above the rules and being elite. And nothing would make them happier than every American outside of their 0.01% elite junta eating bugs, owning nothing, and being happy, and having all of their assets stripped from them for criticizing the elites.
Yeah, I've got a theory on that whole pedo thing. I think that when you're in a cultural war, and you can map this back into history, primarily it was culture fought over religion, or, Japan versus everyone else, or China versus everyone else, or Rome versus everyone else. I mean, it took on different forms, but usually it was nationalistic or religious. The final straw, the final key piece you need to eliminate the willpower and resolve and resilience that comes out of a shared ethos is to start breaking their unbreakable rules, right? That's one of the last things you have to do. And that might mean toppling statues of leaders, right? Like if you're sacking a town and they have a lot of these ancient cultures and modern ones as well. And if you think about North Korea, pretty much deify any former leader they have. You knock the statues down, and then people, they have nothing to appeal to anymore. There's no shining city on the hill or whatever the fuck, right? And it reminds me, I've been using this quote a lot lately, but it reminds me of something G.K. Chesterton said back in the day, that men didn't love Rome because she was great. Rome was great because the men loved her. And when you take away that, then it's like broken window theory. Everything starts to disintegrate. Like all of society starts to go downhill. And I think that protecting children is the last straw. I think that's the one thing they go after, where if a plurality or majority of Americans just throw their hands up in disgust and give up trying to protect children, that'll be the last thing, because then we won't be able to look each other in the eye. You know what I mean? There won't be any like, hey, we've got to go fight this fight, because nobody will believe you, because they will all know that you're all full of shit.
Yeah, I mean, we're literally charging our health industry is charging billions of dollars to mutilate children right now. I mean, there's parents that have been arrested for refusing to transition like a 10-year-old kid, right? I mean, like this is horrific child abuse. It's like a kid can't consent to a tattoo or smoke a cigarette, but they can have their genitals chopped off at, the cost of, tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, it is really a crime against humanity.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's one of the worst things I think I've ever seen in the West, to be honest, since probably something like the Tuskegee experiments. I think this is right in line with that, where we're just like,
I think it's worse because this is children.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, Tuskegee is horrifical. That's castration of prisoners, right? Awful. But this is beyond. This is telling your parents telling parents of children that they are going to go to jail if they don't mutilate their children.
Yeah, or that their kids will kill themselves if they don't mutilate them. You know what I mean? It's not just that's the carrot. You know what I mean? In this fucked up scenario, that's the carrot. It's like, hey, you don't want them to kill yourself, so you gotta let them fucking bandsaw their dick off really quickly. It's like, what the fuck are we talking about here? But I think it's the last. That's the last straw. Right? That's the last thing they need to accomplish, to completely zap all of the willpower, resilience, national pride, whatever it is that motivates people to stand up for themselves and stand up for what they believe in. That's the last Rubicon you've got to cross. And once you get over that one, I think fucking society's done. And we're well on our way. I see real people in these man on the street interviews or in the media or whatever, like sincerely trying to defend this behavior. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I mean, it's, you know, you don't want the kid to kill itself. It's like, I don't want a fucking schizophrenic kid to kill themselves either, but I'm not going to
Well,
pretend.
guess what? A lot of them kill themselves after
Oh, yeah, yeah.
transitioning.
Yeah,
too.
but I'm not going to pretend the schizophrenic person's imaginary friend is real. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't help them. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help society. It's fucking nonsense that we behave this way.
Oh yeah, and look, in like the '90s and 2000s, like workplace sexual harassment was a huge thing, right? Just recently, like the Me Too movement, right? Like but can't harass adults, but we should have books showing kindergartners how to give blowjobs, right? Like if you protest against that, then you're bad,
Sure, yeah.
right? Like if you don't want kindergartners going to like drag shows at pole dancing, there's something wrong with you. I mean, like it's disgusting. It's like grooming of children for these satanic pedophiles.
Yeah, I wonder, how it is that people's minds have become so warped that we're even having debates about this, to be honest.
I mean, I honestly, I think it's a combination of corruption, right? I think a lot of these people who spout it, they don't believe it, right? But they're getting paid from China. They're literally, treasonous, both in government and the media, who are on the take from China to, spew this propaganda to destroy America. But then, a lot of people, like if they're weak-minded, if they hear the same messaging over and over again, they value conformity above all else, that they accept these absolutely insane, evil thoughts, and then they become enlisted in this demonic army, pushing it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
it's people still wearing masks for COVID. Like that set of people are the ones who are like standing up for blowjob books for kindergartners.
Yeah, it's a weird group of folks, I'll tell you that. And maybe this has always been the way humanity is. Maybe it's always been like that, where a large subset of the population is just completely malleable, provided the change they make or the position they retain comes with some sort of convenience, iPads and Hot Pockets. As long as I can fucking microwave my food and have some device right in front of my face, anything else can be going on in the world and I'll be fine. And that is the ultimate.
You hit a key point there. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, the key point is the device in front of their face, right? Again, it's like straight out of 1984, which is like the screen putting forth whatever the propagandists want you to see. Okay, and if you are not trained to critically think, if you're not a healthy skeptic on everything you see, if you're bombarded by this messaging on a screen for 16 hours a day, okay, you're just going to internalize everything. You read that, it goes straight into your brain, and then, eventually they start to believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is what after the 2020 election, this is what I was talking about the most. Certainly there are irregularities, and particularly in Georgia and Michigan and Arizona, right? And things that like this ballot harvesting stuff has to go away. Mail-in voting needs to go away, all this stuff. But the point I made at the time was the courts will deal with this in some way, or maybe they'll fuck us over as well, but that will go to the courts. But you don't necessarily need to hack a voting machine to hack somebody's mind. If you have their attention for 13 to 15 hours a day, and that's the average American, 13 to 15 hours a day, looking at this stupid piece of shit, or on a TV or wherever it is, right? You're over half of your time and 2/3 of your waking hours as a human being are spent on a device of some sort. Your mind is no, like you need to be skeptical, certainly, right? You should definitely be skeptical, but garbage in, garbage out, right? That's a data fucking rule. If you pump garbage into your head, it's gonna fucking stay there. And I wonder if that's why I'm glad you talked about before that one of the things you're doing with the LGB coin is helping conservative charities, things about deplatforming and stuff like that. I think that's a really important thing to make sure that messages are still getting out, that people are still being allowed to, I guess, digitally congregate around conservative principles, because when you feel like this is what they want. This is how you fucking break somebody. If I was interrogating you, if I capture you and a couple of your buddies, right, overseas, I'm in a war situation, and I'm trying to break you, the first thing I'm going to do is make you feel like you're the only person left on earth, right? That's the first thing I do, is to isolate you and make you feel like there's first that there's no hope, then that you're alone, and then that there's some hope if you help me. That's kind of the process you interrogate somebody with. And man, we're kind of in the middle of that right now, aren't we? Trying to make these people who are just like, hey, I don't really give a fuck who you guys bang. Just, can you stop talking to my kids about it, please, for fuck's sake? And then you call that person a terrorist because they show up to the school board meeting. Like this moms going to school board meetings complaining about stuff are now domestic violence extremists. Like, come on, man. Nobody believes that. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make you feel like you're crazy, like you're alone.
And then you're a mom. You're just a regular middle class mom. Now you're a convicted terrorist. Yeah. Where are you going to afford like the lawyers to fight that? And that's the thing where the government miscalculates trying to destroy me, is I know how to fight back. Okay, I'm one of the top lawyers in the country, and I do not quit. And, I can't fight all the battles, but, this happens to regular people. They are alone. They are isolated. It's one, through the coin, one of the charities, we're trying to support. And look, we got to go now beat NASCAR in court because they destroyed, hundreds of thousands of dollars that, coins we set aside for Turning Point. But like you look at, what they're doing and bringing conservative value education back to college kids and now high school kids. This morning on Instagram, I saw Charlie Kirk post a video of Biden sleeping in Hawaii, right after giving this ridiculous story about like a small fire in his house, which is like he tries to be self-centered about that while kids were like burned alive and whatever the hell happened over there, right? But Charlie Kirk posts this video, 2 separate fact checks say Biden wasn't sleeping, right? Like you would see clearly in the video that Biden is sleeping, but Reuters and I forgot the other one both claim that Charlie Kirk is lying about that. I mean, like this is how pervasive the propaganda state is with big tech and how, I mean, again, Missouri versus Biden, which by the way, RFK Jr. has now joined that lawsuit. A court definitively found that the government is actively illegally conspiring with big tech to censor people. Like, it's not a conspiracy theory. This is a court has found this.
Yeah, and it's still going on now. Like, you would have thought after the quote unquote Twitter files that the government would at least take a break. You know what I mean? Like when you get caught.
No, they're doubling down.
Yeah, when you get caught, usually
win this next election.
Yeah, when you get caught, usually like if your dad comes into the room and you're up late playing video games, you're not supposed to be. You throw the remote into the fucking corner of the room and pretend like you're falling asleep. You don't sit there and stare him in the eyes and continue playing. You know what I mean? Which is that tells you how much control they know they're in, because they don't even respond to getting caught anymore. They don't even try to hide what they're doing.
They've got to a point where it's like they almost are bragging, right? Like you look at like the Hunter Biden plea deal with DOJ, where they admitted it was a completely unprecedented plea deal to absolve him of future crimes, even like things he hasn't even been charged with. Right. And then they appoint a special prosecutor who is like good friends with the Biden family. You know what I mean? Like they don't even care, because here's the thing. You're supposed to have checks and balances of the government. Thank God we have the Trump Supreme Court. That is literally like the only thing protecting the rule of law in this country. Right. But like, you've got Biden, who clearly has committed impeachable offenses, accepting money for Ukraine, and yet Trump get impeached for inquiring over these impeachable offenses that he knew Biden committed while vice president, right? So who is gonna impeach the attorney general, right? Like there is no accountability for this weaponization of the government.
Yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned the voter machines before too. Look at Florida, where one of the most important things Governor DeSantis did was requiring, voter ID, banning mail-in ballots, right? Like, put in all these internal controls. Guess what? He won by over 1 million votes, right? It shows the demand for conservatives here. Florida, when DeSantis got elected, it had 30,000 more Democrats than Republicans as registered voters. Now we have like 562,000, more Republicans, right? And the media, all this propaganda, they want you to believe that everybody is on this woke train, right? That Biden got 81 million votes, that we're all outnumbered. Us that believe in honor, in the rule of law, in protecting children, that we're outnumbered, but it's not true. Okay, and a lot of these weak-minded people have been brainwashed, but I would guess it's under 5 or 10% of the country. But the problem is a large number of those people, they're in positions in the media, they're in positions in politics where they could do so much damage, fulfilling the corruption and the bribery of fulfilling this WEF message and the CCP message.
Yeah, I mean, it's look it to the average person, the average American, it sounds like a big problem, and it is a big problem. It sounds insurmountable. I wonder, from your perspective, how you think the average person working a 9 to 5 job kind of insulates themselves from some of this bullshit, or helps to fix the problem, or whatever, right?
Well, here's the thing. Look at a map of America that's red and blue by county.
Mm.
It's like 90% red.
Mm.
Okay. If you look at like where the average American lives, like, they're in, an average suburb or small town, they're overwhelmingly red. Okay. Like the blue areas, it's concentrated. It's like LA, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, right? If you're outside, one of those highly concentrated, elitist, like liberal hubs, you're pretty much surrounded. I mean, even Miami, like we used to be purple. You go on the water and you're seeing tons of Trump
Mm-hmm.
flags, the Santa flags, MAGA flags. Okay, like the overwhelming spirit of this country, still is Christian. They still are conservative. They still believe in these values. It's just we get shouted out, by the media, and these leftist politicians, and with these rigged elections. Don't indict me, bro. Okay, but there's prima facie, evidence that, of voter fraud out there. Okay, they're trying to make you think that everybody has turned to the dark side.
Yeah, I mean, and that's in the problem usually you find the solution, which is don't believe their bullshit. I think that's step one. You know, the government and the media have done nothing to earn your trust in a long time, maybe ever. I mean, I guess the last noble thing I remember from government was George Washington stepping down after 8 years, even when he didn't have to. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's like a
There's been a
plot.
couple. Eisenhower, I think, criticizing the, beware of the military-industrial
Yeah.
complex in the 50s. I think he had it nailed, but he couldn't stop it. I think
Mm.
Kennedy was honorable. That's why they killed him. I think RFK is honorable. Like both his dad and his uncle got blown away by the government, and he's still putting his life on the line without Secret Service protection, to campaign and, red pill a good chunk of
Mm.
America. There still is honor there, but, they try to discredit us and censor us
Yeah.
and arrest us and audit us and, all the other dirty tricks.
Well, that's how you know that you're right. Usually, is if
Hmm.
the government comes after you, because they are just trying to protect institutional power. And the best way to protect institutional power is to make the institution good, right? But the second way to do it is through force, that's when a country is beginning to fail. Before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find you and follow your story, and tell if you want to mention any of your companies, Typhoon Capital, or any more information about LGB Coin, anything you want to share.
Yeah, so on all social media networks, I'm at James Koutoulas, K-O-U-T as in Tom, O-U-L-A-S. So, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, Discord. LGB Coin had a hard fork, so like the active coin is now Let's Go on the Ethereum network. You could read more about that and what we're doing to fight back against NASCAR and the SEC at letsgobrandon.com. And then, yeah, Koutoulas Law is where I do my investor advocacy work as well.
Cool. Well, you guys go check that stuff out. Check out LGB Coin if you're into that. Check out Koutoulas Law. James Koutoulas, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.